My name is Jordan Reyes. I'm 26. And the day I watched my grandparents get evicted from their home of 43 years, something inside me broke and sharpened. Just 2 weeks' notice. No knock, no call. Just a white slip taped to the door, fluttering like a flag of surrender. They stood there, stunned. My grandfather's hands trembling over legal jargon. My grandmother blinking like the words might vanish if she stared long enough. The man behind it all? Brad Collier. Landlord, developer. I had no power, no money, just a journalism degree collecting dust. And a memory like a vault. But if you think this ends with them walking away quietly, think again. If you've ever seen someone try to erase your family, you'll understand why I did what I did next. Before I continue, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe, because the eviction was just the spark. Let me take you back to where the fire began. My grandparents were evicted from their home of 43 years with 2 weeks' notice. No warning, no conversation. Just a cold, white piece of paper taped to their door, fluttering in the wind like a threat dressed as formality. The apartment they had built a life in, where my grandmother cooked Sunday stew with salsa music playing on the radio, where my grandfather hand-wove the living room rug one aching knot at a time, was now considered a redevelopment opportunity. That's what the notice said, a bland phrase to cover up the violence of displacement. I was there when they found it. My grandfather's hands trembled as he read the legal jargon, his voice catching on words like mandatory and non-renewable. My grandmother kept blinking like she could make the letters disappear if she just looked long enough. They didn't cry at first. They just stood there, stunned. Two small figures on a cracked sidewalk in front of a building that no longer wanted them. The crying came later, in the kitchen, over lukewarm tea they forgot to drink. The man behind it all didn't bother to show his face. Brad Collier, our landlord, our so-called community investor, sent a lawyer. A slick woman with red heels and a tone so sharp it could slice through bone. She said the building was structurally obsolete, that demolition was necessary for urban progress. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever seen the look in a grandfather's eyes when he's told he no longer matters. But I stayed quiet. I took notes. I remembered everything. At that moment, I had no money, no legal degree, no connections, just a beat-up laptop, a journalism degree, collecting dust, and a memory like a vault. But what I lacked in power, I made up for in fury. Because this wasn't just about a building. This was about dignity, about legacy, about watching the people who raised me be treated like trash to be cleared out so some tech bro could sip oat milk lattes on their former porch. Brad Collier thought we were disposable, that he could erase a family for the sake of square footage and skyline views. But he didn't know me, not yet. He wanted to erase them. So now, I'll erase him. You've heard the eviction notice, but what you haven't seen yet is what that piece of paper did to the people I love. Stick with me, because this next part, it hurts. And maybe, just maybe, it'll hurt you too. 14 days, that's all they gave them. 14 days to leave behind 43 years of living, breathing history. I remember standing in that living room while my grandmother begged the leasing agent to reconsider, to let them pay more, to at least give them more time. She had baked pan dolls for the meeting, still warm in a dish towel, her voice shaking as she offered it across the table like it might soften his tone. But he didn't even look at her. He just slid a typed response across the table and said the decision was final. The building had to be cleared for demolition by the end of the month. Progress, he said, as if that word alone could pave over everything that mattered. The neighborhood started to fall apart after that. You could feel it. Neighbors who'd shared backyard barbecues stopped answering their doors. Windows that once glowed with holiday lights now stared back, hollow and dark. The woman down the hall who always watered the potted ferns near the elevator left hers to wilt. Conversations turned into goodbyes. And all around us, cardboard boxes grew like tumors. On kitchen counters, beside shoes, under beds. Not filled with junk, but with heirlooms. Memories. Pieces of lives packed away under pressure. My grandfather, a man who had once carved entire staircases with his bare hands, now lay curled up on a second-hand sofa at my cousin's house. No room of his own, no place to rest without asking first. I watched him try to shave over a kitchen sink while pretending it didn't bother him. I watched my grandmother wipe her eyes silently while folding linens that had never belonged to her. They weren't just losing their home. They were losing their place in the world. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I tucked the rage into my chest like a live wire. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my cramped apartment, fists clenched in the dark. I had no power, no title, no money. But I had one thing left that couldn't be boxed up or priced out: the truth. And if money bought this eviction, then truth will burn it down. If you were me, if you saw your grandfather sleeping on a stranger's couch, would you stay silent? Or would you start sharpening your resolve, like I did? Keep listening, because silence wasn't an option anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't powerless. I was just sharpening the knife. There's something terrifying about helplessness. It's like drowning in plain air, silent, invisible, and humiliating. For a few days after the eviction, I moved through the world like a ghost. I helped my grandparents pack what they could, watched my grandfather fold his favorite flannel shirt like it was a ritual, watched my grandmother wrap her wedding photo in 2 scarves like bubble wrap could preserve memory. I kept thinking, if this is how it ends, then what was the point of all the years they gave to this city? But one morning, while scrolling through a zoning appeal email on my cracked laptop, I saw it, a line item in the city planning database that didn't make sense. Permits filed too quickly, signed off by an official who had retired 2 years ago. It was sloppy, arrogant, and it cracked something open inside me. Brad Collier wasn't just a greedy man with a condo obsession. He was a system, a sprawling, polished machine powered by fraud and protected by silence. And I wasn't just a granddaughter. I was a trained journalist, and I knew how to dig. I called Clara, a friend from the old newsroom who had left full-time reporting but still had her login access to the city's construction archive. She didn't ask questions, just said, "Send me what you have." And 2 hours later, I was swimming in building inspection reports, zoning maps, developer memos, and enough red flags to start a revolution. I highlighted every inconsistency, cross-referenced every address. I looked for names that repeated, permits issued too fast, signatures that didn't match. I found stories hidden between the lines, laborers injured with no OSHA records, safety violations glossed over, families displaced like mine with no legal representation. Each night, I filled a fresh notebook with scribbles and timelines. On weekends, I walked through neighborhoods Brad had redeveloped, talking to families pushed out under threats of sudden rent hikes or mysterious repairs. I recorded everything. People opened their doors and spilled what they'd kept bottled up: fear, anger, resignation. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the truth had weight. When I was done, I had over 140 pages. Forged permits, internal emails, voice recordings from a bitter contractor who had been cheated out of his pay, and photos of unlicensed work sites that were still under active construction. I printed 3 copies. One went to a local news station I knew didn't flinch under pressure. One to a housing justice nonprofit with a reputation for biting back. And the last to an attorney named Morgan, an old bulldog who made his name suing shady developers and never lost a case. Then I sat back. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I waited like a hunter waiting for the first rustle in the brush. Because this time, I wasn't running. I was loading the first round. Now, what happens when a nobody starts pulling the right threads? When the truth gets louder than money? I'm about to show you. But be warned, this was just my first move. At exactly 6 p.m., the screen faded to black, and the headline hit like a hammer. Collier Group exposed, permits forged, lives displaced. It wasn't sensationalist. It wasn't exaggerated. It was precise, deliberate, and laced with every receipt I had bled for. Anchor voices read off details like surgical strikes, fake permit approvals, inspector payoffs, ghost contractors, buildings going up with no safety oversight. And in the middle of it all, Brad Collier's smug, airbrushed face on the screen, juxtaposed with footage of families like mine packing up their lives in silence. Brad must have seen it the moment it aired. He scrambled onto a morning talk show the next day, smiling like a man who still thought charisma could outpace consequence. He blamed disgruntled tenants and activist manipulation. He laughed, said the story was clever fiction, and that progress always offends those who cling to the past. But behind that smile, something was already cracking. 48 hours later, the city's Department of Building Safety released a notice freezing all pending and active permits associated with Collier Group. Not just the new tower projects, everything. Office complexes, luxury high-rises, including the one that was already pouring foundation on the site where my grandparents used to live. Brad's empire didn't slow down. It slammed into a wall. Investors withdrew. Construction sites shut down mid-shift. Trucks reversed out of job zones. Security guards stood awkwardly at half-built lobbies. And the phone calls he once made with arrogance turned into desperate emails sent after midnight begging for public relations help. But it was too late. The beast had been pierced in the chest. And me? I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply watched. From a quiet distance. Like I'd trained myself to do. People asked if I wanted revenge. I said, no, I want to go biblical. This wasn't about yelling louder. It was about pulling one perfect thread and watching the whole suit unravel. I had just pulled the first, and Brad had no idea how many more I was holding. You think that news story was the climax? Not even close. What came next broke the silence in a room full of suits and exposed a man who thought no one could touch him. Ready for that moment? Stay with me. The council chamber was packed. Journalists, housing advocates, former tenants, even a few construction workers still wearing dust-stained boots. The walls buzzed with whispers, the kind of anticipation that builds right before something collapses. And at the center of it all sat Brad Collier, looking smaller than he ever had on billboards or glossy magazine covers. Gone was the sharp navy suit. Today, his collar sagged slightly, his tie was crooked, and his confidence, his weapon of choice, was nowhere in sight. The lead attorney stood calmly and began reading the charges aloud. 7 counts of document fraud, 5 counts of tenant intimidation and coercion. A dozen more allegations were still pending. Brad didn't blink at first. He stared straight ahead, jaw locked. But when the audio file began to play, his voice on full volume, sneering as he described elderly tenants as leeches stuck to prime real estate, his mask cracked. Heads turned. Some gasped. I saw one councilwoman stiffen like she'd just been slapped. Brad's face turned the color of poured concrete. His hands clenched around the edge of the table, whitening at the knuckles. He opened his mouth like he might object, defend himself, claim some kind of misunderstanding. But no words came. He just sat there, blinking rapidly as the room swallowed him whole. Cameras clicked like gunfire. A dozen reporters captured the moment. He finally bowed his head, chin to chest, as if the weight of what he'd built and destroyed had finally landed. There was no speech, no press statement, just a man unmasked by his own greed and dragged, quietly, into the light. I stood near the back. I hadn't spoken yet, but when he looked up, hollow-eyed, searching for someone to blame, I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You didn't just evict a family, I told him. You woke a witness. And then, just like that, he went silent. If you've ever dreamed of a revenge so poetic it lives rent-free in someone's mind forever, then don't blink. Because this next move, I didn't just hit back. I made sure he'd see it every day. I bought the building next to Brad Collier's headquarters. Not for the view, not for the real estate value. I bought it because I wanted him to see what redemption looks like when it's built brick by brick, by the very people he once tried to erase. With the media coverage and the settlements that followed the investigation, I launched a public campaign, not for revenge, but for restoration. Donations poured in, not just from our city, but from every corner of the country. Former tenants, families, strangers, people who'd watched their own neighborhoods disappear under the weight of luxury glass towers and profit margins. They didn't just give money, they gave rage, they gave hope, they gave solidarity. And so, we rebuilt. The building we acquired wasn't flashy. It had good bones, the kind of bones that reminded me of my grandfather's workshop. Sturdy, worn, honest. We turned it into a transitional shelter and community resource center for displaced residents. No waiting lists, no red tape, just dignity. On the day of the opening, we hung a massive banner across the facade, white letters on a navy backdrop. It read, "For every home you took, we build one back." It faced the mirrored glass walls of Collier Group like a truth he couldn't look away from. His empire might have been tall, but ours had foundation. And beneath that sign, there was a backlit poster framed in steel and set on the sidewalk like a promise. My grandparents, sitting together on a wooden bench, we salvaged from their old building before demolition. They looked peaceful, proud, alive. Below them, in bold gold font, were the words, "You tried to bury them. We made them bloom." I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to stand in his boardroom. All I had to do was exist, louder, brighter, more unshakable than ever. Let him sip his coffee every morning while staring out that office window, knowing the ground he built his kingdom on now speaks back. That wasn't a shelter, it was a monument. Justice isn't just in headlines. Sometimes it shows up in quiet moments. In sunlight through a window. In laughter over tea. Don't leave now, because what happened next might just warm your heart. They moved in on a Sunday afternoon. No fanfare, no moving company, just a borrowed pickup truck, a handful of neighbors who'd once been strangers, and a soft autumn breeze that carried the scent of eucalyptus through the open corridors of the new building. The elevator doors opened gently, and my grandfather, for the first time in years, didn't have to take a single stair. Their new apartment sat on the 4th floor, bathed in light from wide east-facing windows, with polished hardwood floors that warmed under the sun. The kitchen smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner. The balcony overlooked a quiet garden shared by other tenants, many of whom had their own stories of loss and return. It wasn't extravagant, but it was dignified. It was safe. And most importantly, it was theirs. I bought them a new sofa, deep blue, firm but cushioned, wide enough for the two of them to nap without bumping elbows. The first new piece of furniture they'd owned in over 20 years. My grandmother insisted on sewing the cushions with covers made from old curtains she refused to part with. Just because it's new, she said, doesn't mean it can't carry something old. That night, as I helped them unpack boxes filled with old photo frames and weathered recipe books, I found my name scribbled in the margins of a banana bread recipe, my 10-year-old scrawl asking for extra chocolate chips. My grandfather smiled when he saw it, a soft, knowing smile. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. Evenings changed for us. They slowed down in the best way. I'd visit after work. No breaking news to chase, no courtrooms to sit through, just the simple rhythm of being home. My grandmother would pour tea, chamomile for her, peppermint for me, and we'd sit quietly on the balcony. Sometimes we didn't even speak. We just listened to the distant hum of traffic and the rustling of garden leaves, letting the quiet wrap around us like a blanket. My grandfather, always a man of action, took to listening to the radio again. Public broadcasts, old jazz, baseball commentary. He leaned back on the new sofa, ankles crossed, and tapped his fingers on the armrests like he was keeping time with the past. One night, I caught them laughing, really laughing. My grandfather had made a joke about how soft the mattress was compared to their old one, and my grandmother slapped his knee in mock offense. It wasn't the kind of forced laugh people use to hide weariness. It was light, full, unburdened. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Relief. It didn't come all at once. Healing never does. It came in moments. In the smell of garlic sizzling in olive oil on a Thursday night. In the sound of the faucet running while my grandfather filled a bird feeder on the balcony. In the steady scratch of my grandmother's pen as she wrote postcards to cousins she hadn't seen in years. It came in grocery runs, in evening walks, in the ritual of folding clean laundry. Justice didn't erase what we lost, but it gave us room to rebuild. And I rebuilt too. Not just with brick and mortar or legal battles, but with words. I wrote one final article. Not for headlines, not for awards, just for those who might need it most. I called it, "You Are Not Too Small to Move a Building." It wasn't about law or evidence or journalism. It was about courage. About the quiet power of refusing to look away when something unjust unfolds in front of you. I wrote about watching my grandparents pack their lives into boxes. I wrote about how power looks like silence until someone dares to speak. I wrote for the kid reading it at 2 a.m., wondering if standing up for one's family is ever worth the cost. And I told them, yes. Every damn time, yes. I closed the piece with a line that had been echoing in me since the first eviction notice hit that front door. They called us burdens. We became builders. And now, in the calm after the storm, in the scent of mint tea and warm bread, in the sunlight pooling through that fourth-floor window, I finally understood what revenge was meant to feel like. Not loud, not cruel, but steady, full of grace, and impossible to forget. But wait, do you think the story ends in peace? Think again. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is watching someone collapse under the weight of their own lies. Let me show you what that looked like. It didn't happen all at once, not like a courtroom verdict or a front-page headline. Brad Collier didn't collapse in a single moment. He unraveled, thread by thread, until there was nothing left but silence where his empire used to be. At first, it was small things. A delayed press release, a project manager who stopped returning calls, a closed-door meeting that no one came out of smiling. Then came the headlines. Not just mine, but waves of them. Investigative follow-ups, exposés from former employees, financial journalists digging into offshore accounts. The truth echoed. The public turned. Within a week, he lost his title. Not formally, no grand announcement, no ceremony, but his name disappeared from the company's website. The executive page was quietly scrubbed. When you called the front desk of Collier Group, the receptionist no longer said, "Mr. Collier is in a meeting." She said, "I'm sorry, he's no longer available." That's how power ends sometimes. Not with a bang, but with a line erased from a bio. His accounts were frozen 2 days later. Asset seizure orders sealed by the city's financial crimes task force. Reports surfaced of creditors storming Collier Group's legal offices, demanding answers, clawing at what scraps of control still remained. Investors distanced themselves. Partners walked away. Several firms issued public statements condemning a pattern of behavior inconsistent with our values. That's corporate code for, we saw the smoke and we're running before the flames get us too. I got an anonymous email one night, no subject line, just a message that read, "He hasn't come to the office in days. No calls, no driver. Facebook's dead. His penthouse has a for sale sign in the window." Attached was a blurry photo, taken from across the street. The same skyline view he once bragged about, now marked with the quiet shame of a man trying to disappear. There was no need to confront him. No last showdown. No final speech. Because the most brutal consequences are the ones you don't have to deliver yourself. The world did the work. The system he manipulated, the wealth he worshipped, the lies he stacked into towers, all of it folded inward. I imagined him in that penthouse, the one that overlooked a city he once controlled, empty now, furniture covered in sheets, lights off in the middle of the day, a silence so dense you could taste it, the kind that grows when a man has nothing left to talk about. I pictured him staring at the building I bought next door, the shelter, the mural, the banner. I wondered how many times he tried not to look at it. I wondered how many mornings he pulled the blinds too fast, only to see my grandparents' faces smiling back from across the street. He wasn't on the news anymore. His name became a whisper, then a warning. His LinkedIn page vanished. Public statements ceased. Someone said he'd been spotted at a lake house upstate, alone, walking his dog with no leash. Someone else said he'd filed for bankruptcy under a shell company. I didn't care enough to check. I didn't need his apology. I didn't want his remorse. I just wanted him to sit with himself, to know that everything he destroyed had not just come back. It had come back brighter, louder, more permanent. And he couldn't scrub that away, couldn't buy silence, couldn't build a new tower to hide behind. All he could do was exist, day after day, with no empire, no audience, no exit plan. Revenge didn't come in the form of handcuffs or headlines. It came in the form of absence. In the fact that no one answered his calls, that no one believed him anymore, that his voice, once a weapon, now echoed back unanswered. And every time he passed that building, the one that stood where his pride used to, I hope he felt it. That quiet, surgical truth. You did this to yourself. And the world, it just kept spinning, without him. We exposed him. We broke the cycle. But what do you build after tearing an empire down? That's the part that matters most. Don't go yet. The real legacy starts now. Justice doesn't rebuild the past. It doesn't refill the teacups shattered on moving day, or return the sound of creaky floorboards my grandparents used to walk across each morning. It doesn't erase the fear I saw in their eyes when they were told their home was no longer theirs. But it does something else. It builds a future, a firmer one where people like my grandparents don't have to whisper when they talk about eviction. One where silence is no longer the only option. That's why I started Reclaim. It began in a small rented office, 2 desks pushed together under a flickering light bulb, and a stack of files taller than my grandfather's toolbox. Free legal support for seniors and long-term tenants facing eviction. I had no donors at first, just a story, and a city that had finally decided to listen. Within weeks, the inbox was flooded, not just with questions, but with letters, handwritten ones, emails. Notes on napkins slid under the door. Thank you for making us visible. We thought we were alone. You made them see us. Some wrote to share heartbreak, lives packed away too soon. Others sent donations with notes scribbled in the memo line, for justice. A retired teacher in Chicago sent a check with the words, "This is in memory of my sister. She lost her home to a man like Collier too." A group of tenants in Brooklyn formed a community board and asked if they could translate my article into Spanish. They framed the title and taped it to the laundry room wall. You are not too small to move a building. And as Reclaim grew, so did the message. Not in speeches or stages, but in living rooms, in kitchen tables where people finally knew their rights, in courtrooms where they stood just a little taller. I watched stories shift. Evictions stopped, leases renegotiated, threats silenced. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. It was proof that the cracks in a system could become light if you pushed hard enough. I didn't start Reclaim for applause. I started it because I remembered what it felt like to watch my grandfather carry memories out of a home he built with his bare hands, knowing no one would be held accountable. I couldn't change that day, but I could make sure fewer people had to live it. And I could rewrite what came after. Now, on most evenings, I come home to something quieter. In the backyard, the lavender my grandmother planted last spring has bloomed across the fence line, its scent sweet and steady in the dusk. Paper lanterns swing from tree branches, catching the last golden light of day. My grandfather sits in his old chair, the one we almost had to leave behind, radio crackling beside him. My grandmother brings out the tea, humming the same lullabies she used to hum when I couldn't sleep. And I sit with them. No headlines, no cases, no walls to climb. Just presence, just peace. They don't talk much about the eviction anymore. Not because it didn't scar, but because it doesn't define them. That chapter closed, not with a bang, but with roots planted in the ground we chose. Sometimes I still get asked if I'd ever forgive Brad Collier. I tell them the truth. Forgiveness doesn't mean inheritance. He doesn't get to own the ending. We do. As the sun drops and the garden glows, I take a breath and look around at the life we reclaimed, the laughter that returned, the home we built not with blueprints, but with persistence. I watch my grandmother laugh at a joke my grandfather didn't even finish telling. I watch the wind stir through the lavender, carrying the scent into a world that, for once, feels like it listened. And I say, almost to myself, almost like a prayer, they tried to evict our memories. But now, we own the narrative. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story moved you, even just a little, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and hit like and subscribe. Because there are more voices like mine, and they deserve to be heard.